A 60-year-old man from the Kursk region of Russia sat down in a clinic in April 2026 and received an injection. His name has not been made public. His diagnosis was skin melanoma, and according to Alexander Ginsburg, the director of the Gamaleya National Research Center, the same institution that produced the Sputnik V COVID vaccine, what that man received was a personalized mRNA cancer vaccine, the first of its kind to be administered to a human patient anywhere in the world, if you believe the Russian government. The announcement made headlines on every continent. A cancer vaccine, free to Russian citizens, based on cutting-edge mRNA technology, built specifically for each individual patient using the genetic blueprint of their own tumor. It sounded almost too good to be true. And here is the thing about claims that sound too good to be true. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not, and sometimes the truth is considerably more complicated than either of those answers. This story is all three. Let us start with what Vladimir Putin actually said. In late 2024, Putin told a meeting of the Russian government that scientists were very close to creating cancer vaccines and immunomodulatory drugs for individual therapy. He said these treatments would soon be available to patients, effectively for free. The statement was brief, carefully worded, and short on specifics. But the global media took the phrase cancer vaccine and ran with it. Within weeks, headlines around the world were declaring that Russia had cured cancer, that a vaccine was ready, that it would be free, that Russia had beaten the West to the most consequential medical breakthrough in a generation. None of that was quite what Putin said, and none of it was quite true. Here is what was actually happening. Russian researchers were, and are, developing not one but several different cancer vaccine candidates. The confusion in global reporting stemmed largely from the fact that these programs were being discussed as if they were a single product. They are not. The first is a therapeutic vaccine for colorectal cancer, which Russian health officials said was ready for clinical use as of late 2024. A therapeutic vaccine is not a preventive vaccine. It does not stop you getting cancer. It is a treatment. It works by training the immune system to recognize and attack cancer cells that are already present in the body. The colorectal vaccine was described as ready for clinical deployment, but no detailed trial data was released publicly. The second, and the one generating the most international attention, is NeoOncovac, a personalized mRNA vaccine developed by the Gamaleya Center, targeting melanoma specifically. This is the vaccine administered to the Kursk patient in April 2026. Ginsburg reported that early observations showed, in his words, small shifts in cytokine production, meaning early signs that the immune system was responding to the treatment. The patient would go on to receive approximately 10 more doses. Immunological results would be evaluated later. The third is a broader candidate called Enteromics, described as a next-generation mRNA vaccine that could potentially be adapted for multiple cancer types. Enteromics has generated some of the most dramatic claims, including reports of 100% immune response and 60 to 80% reduction in tumor growth in Phase 1 trials involving 48 patients. No peer-reviewed data supporting those figures has been published in any international scientific journal. Now, before you dismiss all of this as Russian propaganda, it is worth understanding the science underneath these announcements, because the science is real and it is extraordinary. Personalized mRNA cancer vaccines are not a Russian invention. They are one of the most active areas of cancer research in the world. The basic concept works like this. Every cancer is different. Even two patients with the same type of cancer, say melanoma, have tumors with different genetic mutations. Those mutations produce proteins that appear on the surface of cancer cells. These proteins are called neoantigens. They are, in effect, a fingerprint unique to each patient's cancer. An mRNA vaccine can be designed to target those neoantigens. The vaccine delivers mRNA instructions to the patient's cells, instructing them to produce copies of those neoantigen proteins. The immune system sees those proteins, recognizes them as foreign, mounts an immune response, and then, crucially, remembers them. When the immune system then encounters the actual cancer cells displaying the same neoantigens, it attacks. The idea is to turn the body's own defenses into a targeted weapon against a tumor that has been specifically mapped to that patient's biology. This is not theoretical. Moderna and Merck are in phase 3 clinical trials with an mRNA cancer vaccine called mRNA 4157, targeting melanoma and non-small cell lung cancer. Phase 2 data published in peer-reviewed journals showed that the vaccine, used in combination with an existing immunotherapy drug, reduced the risk of cancer recurrence or death by 44% compared to immunotherapy alone. That is a significant result. Regulatory submissions are expected in 2026. BioNTech, the German company behind the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine, has its own personalized mRNA cancer vaccine in trials. In patients with pancreatic cancer, one of the hardest cancers to treat, their vaccine generated immune responses that were still detectable nearly 4 years after treatment. That is remarkable for a disease where the 5-year survival rate is currently around 12%. The science works, the approach is sound, and it is being developed transparently through peer-reviewed journals, published clinical trial data, and independent verification. Which brings us back to Russia. The fundamental problem with Russia's cancer vaccine announcements is not that the science is impossible. It is that the evidence has not been shared. Professor Kingston Mills of Trinity College Dublin, one of the leading immunologists in Europe, put it plainly when asked about the Russian claims. "There is nothing in scientific journals about it," he said. "No paper providing information about the science. Without clinical trial data, without peer review, without independent verification, there is nothing to evaluate. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That evidence has not been provided." A clinician scientist at Imperial College London stated that they could not understand what stage of development the Russian vaccine was actually at. The announcements were combining language from very different stages of the research pipeline, preclinical animal data, early phase 1 signals, and political statements, in a way that made it impossible to assess what had actually been established. The phase 1 results claimed for enteromics, 100% immune response in 48 patients, have not been published in any peer-reviewed journal. There is no independent confirmation from outside Russia. The figures are remarkable on their face, if accurate. But in the history of medicine, results that cannot be independently verified carry no scientific weight regardless of how promising they appear. It is also worth noting what has happened before. In August 2020, Russia became the first country in the world to approve a COVID vaccine, which it named Sputnik V. The announcement was met with widespread skepticism from the international scientific community. Russia had compressed its trial timeline dramatically. The published data, when it eventually appeared in The Lancet, showed the vaccine was effective. But the initial rollout had proceeded well before that data existed, and questions about the integrity of some of the trial data persisted for years. Russia had allowed national prestige to outrun scientific process. The pattern here is similar: an announcement timed for geopolitical impact, claims of being first, an emphasis on what the treatment will eventually cost Russian citizens rather than on what the clinical evidence currently shows, and a notable absence from the international scientific literature. None of this means the vaccine will not work. Personalized mRNA vaccines may well become one of the defining medical breakthroughs of this century. Russia has capable researchers. The Gamaleya Center is a serious institution with genuine expertise. But there is a difference between a scientific development and a scientific claim. And there is a cost to blurring that distinction, not just to scientific credibility, but to the patients who hear these headlines and begin to build hope on them. Cancer is not an abstraction. It is the most frightening word in the language for a very large number of people, and the people most desperate for a breakthrough are also the people most vulnerable to being misled by one that has been announced before it can be proven. That is not a small thing. What is true is this: the science of personalized mRNA cancer vaccines is real, it is advancing rapidly, and it is genuinely promising in ways that would have seemed like science fiction a decade ago. Across multiple countries and multiple research programs, the evidence is building that this approach can work. What is unverified is the specific claim that Russia has a working cancer vaccine ready for deployment in its population. Until the data is published, subjected to peer review, and independently replicated, that claim sits in the same category as every other extraordinary medical announcement made in the absence of evidence. The history of medicine is filled with treatments that worked. It is also filled with treatments that were announced before anyone knew whether they worked. The difference between those two things is a clinical trial, a peer-reviewed paper, an independent replication, the slow, unglamorous machinery of scientific verification. That machinery exists for a reason. And until Russia runs it in public, where the world can see the data, the honest answer to the question of whether the cancer vaccine works is the same answer it always is in these situations: we do not know yet. Subscribe if you want more. I cover cases like this every week. I'm the Moist Towelette. I'll see you in the next one.